In the realm of geopolitics, there are a few multilateral organizations whose every activity is watched keenly across the globe. The G20 is one of them. An organization explicitly designed after the Asian financial crisis served as a meeting between finance ministers and central bank governors. But after another crisis in 2008, it was elevated to the level of heads of government. It now serves as a platform to discuss world issues, announce new partnerships, and foster cooperation. In this year's highly anticipated G20, amidst the controversial absence of Russia and Xi Jinping, an economic deal was announced. An economic framework spanning across continents and promising to be a game changer, it set the ball rolling for discussions and excitement about its potential. Linking India, the Middle East, and Europe, it's called the India-Middle East-Europe Corridor, or IMEC. What does it entail? Will it be successful? What challenges would it face? We'll answer all of these questions and more. Let's compartmentalize and explore this chapter one by one. Chapter 1. The India-Middle East-Europe Corridor. The India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor was gleefully announced by the leaders of the participating countries at the G20 summit held in New Delhi. The corridor reportedly plans to make India the centerpiece between the Middle East and Southeast Asia. Do you remember the spice route during India's history? How it exported India's goods to the rest of the world? Well, they say history repeats itself. However, the IMEC will facilitate not only the flow of spices, but also fuel, data, goods, electricity, and energy, and will serve as the bridge between different cultures and continents. The reports coming out of the G20 are still fresh, but the reported participant countries, according to the MOU, are as follows: India, the USA, the UAE, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, France, Germany, Italy, and the European Union. How is the corridor going to be demarcated? The Eastern Corridor is going to link India with the Middle East, and the Northern Corridor will link the Middle East to Europe. It will work through a combination of rail and shipping routes, which will facilitate the transport of goods. Reports also state that a hydrogen pipeline will be established that will run parallel to the railway line and supply the deficit countries with much-needed fuel. You might be wondering, what about Pakistan and China? Well, this corridor ensures that India is able to bypass both these territories, including the troubled territory of Afghanistan. Now that we roughly understand the routes and the basic framework of the corridor, let's probe the corridor a little more deeply and explore its different features. But before we do that, if you're enjoying our content so far, why don't you hit that subscribe button? Your support helps us in delivering quality content. Chapter 2. A deep dive into the IMEC. As the title of this chapter suggests, we're going to understand the IMEC in a little bit more detail. A framework that is as far-ranging as this would require a lot of funding, right? Absolutely. Since it's still fresh, there are no concrete plans regarding where the money might come from. Reports suggest that the money might come from multiple public-private partnerships. The smaller group of countries, collectively called the G7, have pledged in May that they would contribute 600 billion euros by 2027 to counter another similar economic corridor called the Belt and Road Initiative, but more on that later. However, reports regarding the funding are still fresh. There's still some ambiguity regarding financial commitments. There is, however, no ambiguity about India being the focal point in this arrangement. What benefits could it have for the South Asian country? First and foremost, it will make India's exports more competitive. By cutting down costs and making them more efficient in terms of resources, it will help boost India's trade. India happens to be Saudi Arabia's second most traded partner. This arrangement will ensure that the same trajectory is maintained. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi mentioned that this framework would promote sustainable development and give rise to the transport of hydrogen, which is considered a green fuel. You might be wondering, does this not benefit India immensely? You would be absolutely spot on. This corridor would ensure that the logistics, such as supply chains, are better streamlined and would result in the increase of jobs across the region. Reports state that it would cut down the time and cost required to transport goods from India to China by 40% and 0% respectively. You might also be wondering, does this not put India at loggerheads with China, and especially China's similar program of Belt and Road Initiative? There are some mixed reactions, but one cannot escape the comparisons. So we're also going to take a look at that in our next chapter. Chapter 3. Is IMEC a counter to BRI? The Belt and Road Initiative is a similar economic corridor that was announced in China in 2013 to facilitate cross-country infrastructure project collaboration and seamless trade flows. It's been able to have 155 countries on board as of August 2023 and has undertaken 3,000 projects with almost $1 trillion invested. Does this not sound quite similar to IMEC and its proposed mandate? In some ways, yes. Experts say that in order to counter China's growing influence, the US and its allies have initiated this agreement to offer an alternative to the BRI. We should note that Chinese President Xi Jinping was notably absent from this conference. Speculation then arises whether he was in opposition to such a corridor or if he viewed it in opposition to his country's Belt and Road Initiative. We should also mention that the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Israel are the partners in signing this MOU. It's interesting because Israel and Saudi Arabia do not have open diplomatic channels of any kind. This might be another attempt to counter China's rising influence in the Middle East. If you remember, not long ago, in the month of March of 2023, China brokered a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Fearing that its traditional ally in the Middle East might be slipping away, the IMEC provides a platform for Israel and Saudi to grow closer together. If we look at it from a macro perspective, then the intent of both the corridors and the general outcome seems to be quite similar, but there are also some stark differences. Although some specifics are different, funding in BRI is quite opaque and the source of funds is coming from a single source, i.e. China. Funding in the IMEC might either come from a consortium of countries or arrangements between public and private entities. Initial reports suggest that the source of such funds will be kept accessible and transparent. Another difference is that the IMEC is not just a multimodal connectivity project. It also includes underwater cables for data transfer and digital connectivity. But what do you think about the potential of this project? Do you think this will be successful? Let's talk about where it could prosper and where it might find difficulties in our last chapter. Chapter 4. IMEC. Our predictions and the way ahead. Before we talk about the potential success of IMEC, we must first talk a little about BRI's shortfalls. This is because, if IMEC is to succeed, it has to take heed of where such an arrangement might go wrong. We've spoken about the funding being opaque in the case of BRI. Additionally, however, China has been accused of using BRI as a means to gain economic and geopolitical leverage over certain countries. It has been accused of sanctioning unsustainable loans to countries and further entrapping them in a debt cycle, giving their corridor a negative connotation of a widely popular term of debt trap diplomacy. President Joe Biden went ahead and cracked it up a notch by framing it as a debt and noose arrangement. There have also been reports that the Chinese economy is slowing down. In such a scenario, projects might get delayed and the IMEC might become a great alternative for countries to join. Plus, controversies such as the Hambantota port with Sri Lanka, the construction of a military base in Djibouti, and the East Coast rail link in Malaysia have put questions on China's real intentions. What are some ways, then, that the IMEC might be unsuccessful? Well, the IMEC is still in its nascent stage. There are no concrete plans yet on how it's going to get established. Coordinating between different countries and entities, especially to establish cross-country infrastructure, can be challenging. Plus, there are no financial commitments yet. Building on our last point, coordinating funding can also be quite challenging. The IMEC is also touted to run through Israel and Jordan, which can be geopolitically impossible to manage. We might also add that the BRI has been running for a decade, so it's far along in its development as compared to IMEC, which is obviously in its infancy. What other things can you think of? Will IMEC realize its potential, or will it fail to live up to the hype? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, but only time will tell which way the IMEC will go. This signals the end of our video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe and hit that like button. If you're feeling generous, do hit that bell icon. Your support means the world to us. Thank you and goodbye.